It looked practically was that between the second and the third hour, when my experience was culminating, a research assistant came and said it was time to drive the brain waves. So she took me to a little cell. I lay down. She pasted the electrodes on my head, asked me to close my eyes, and then brought this gigantic strobe, put it above my head, and turned this thing on. And in the next moment, there was light like I had never seen in my life, couldn't even imagine existed. My first idea was this must have been like what it looked like in Hiroshima when the bomb went off. Today I think it was more like the Dharmakaya, the primary clear light from the Tibetan Book of the Dead that we're supposed to see at the moment of death. My consciousness was catapulted out of the body. I lost the connection with the body. I lost the research assistant, I lost the clinic, I lost Prague, then I lost the planet, and then I had the feeling my consciousness had absolutely no boundaries. And when she was following very carefully the protocol, going from 2 cycles to 60 back, then leaving it for a while in the middle of the alpha, then the theta, then the delta range, and then she turned it off. And as she was doing it, I had this incredible cosmic type of experience of cosmic consciousness. And then when she turned it off, my consciousness started to shrink again. I found the planet, I found Prague, I found my body. And after a while, I managed to align my consciousness with my body again. And I was very impressed what just had happened to me. And I thought, well, I'm stuck with psychiatry, so this, by far, is the most interesting thing you can do when you're a psychiatrist, study non-ordinary states of consciousness. So for the last, it's now 45 years, I have really done very little else professionally, but something that was in one way or another related to these non-ordinary states. About half of the time was clinical research with psychedelics in the Research Institute in Prague, and then at the Maryland Psychiatric Research Center, where for a few years I was heading the last surviving psychedelic research in the United States. The second half, my wife Christina and I developed the holotropic breathwork, where you can induce powerful non-ordinary states using very simple means like faster breathing, some evocative music, and a certain kind of body work. I had a lot of contact with anthropologists. I spent some time with shamans. I participated in various ceremonies of native cultures, with peyote, with mushrooms, with ayahuasca. I did some work with people who had near-death experiences. We also had one of the studies we did at the Maryland Psychiatric Research Center was work with people who had terminal cancer facing death. So working with people with near-death experiences, and having contact with thanatologists, doing some work with people who had UFO abduction experiences, some of the people studying these kinds of experiences, in contact with some spiritual teachers, Siddha Yoga, the people of the Benedictine order, some Zen Buddhists, and so on. So all these things, also work with people who had spontaneous episodes of what we call spiritual emergencies, but basically psychotic states with a lot of spiritual content. So I published a number of books about it, because during this work there were many challenging experiences and many challenging observations. Quite a few of them could not be somehow interpreted in terms of the kind of training that I got in medicine, in psychiatry, and in psychoanalysis. So I wrote books on the different aspects of these observations. And quite a few of them have been published by State University New York Press. And then about 3 years ago, I got a letter from them, said, we published several of your books. Would you consider writing one book in which you would kind of summarize the observations from this work and specify somehow the conceptual challenges, the kinds of observations and experiences that cannot be accounted for in terms of the psychiatry and psychology that we have in the West? And would you also suggest what kind of revisions would have to be made in psychiatry and psychology to accommodate these kinds of experiences? I was just approaching 70 and told myself that I would sort of at least partially retire and pass the training to some other people. So we needed a manual for the training. And so this was a very welcome opportunity to get the manual for our training published by SUNY Press. So I wrote a book and I gave it a kind of deliberately challenging title, Psychology of the Future, expressing my really strong belief that if we systematically study the kind of observations and the experiences in these non-ordinary states, that it would radically change psychology and psychiatry, to the extent that it would resemble what happened to physicists in the third decade, that we would somehow catch up with the change in the worldview that happened in quantum relativistic physics and the kind of things that are outlined in what has been called the new paradigm thinking. So this is something that I would like to share with you. And I'm very well aware that it's going to be very provocative for some of you. I have less than an hour to communicate something that took me years to accept when I was experiencing it and I was with people who were experiencing it. So those are really major challenges, conceptual challenges. So I wouldn't expect that it would be easily acceptable. But, the exciting thing is that you're going to have psilocybin research here, so you hopefully will observe some of the things yourselves, and you'll be able to say whether or not you see it in a similar way. So I have studied non-ordinary states of consciousness. Now the first problem was semantic. You know that in psychiatry, most psychiatrists today use the term altered states, which I cannot stand now after years of consciousness research. And I always have to think about veterinary medicine when I hear it, when you get your dog altered. Because the idea is that we should experience ourselves and the world in a particular way, and that these altered states are kind of a distortion of what it should be. That these are kind of bastardized versions. Whereas I came to the conclusion that they are healing, they are transformative, they are evolutionary, and that they open up dimensions of reality which are ontogenetically real, or some kind of interesting, radically different perspective on everyday reality. So we prefer, those of us who've done some consciousness research, prefer the term non-ordinary. But there's also a problem with that because that still covers a very large, what is non-ordinary state of consciousness. You can get drunk and certainly be in a non-ordinary state of consciousness. You might learn a lesson or two, but it's not going to be very healing or transformative or revealing. Organic psychosis, trivial deliria, they're all non-ordinary altered states, but they are not the kind of category I was interested in. I was interested in the types of experiences that I asked you about when I asked the question, did you have any of those experiences? And I was just astounded that in psychiatry we don't have any special name for that category of experiences. We call them all altered states of consciousness. And basically seeing them in the category of pathology, not having any positive use for them. So I decided to give them a name, and I call them holotropic. Holos means whole, and tropic is derived from trepein, which means moving towards or being oriented towards. So it literally means moving toward wholeness or being oriented towards wholeness. Now, what it would mean that we somehow are not whole the way we are. So the basic idea behind this term is that we identify with just with fraction of who we are in the ordinary state of consciousness. I usually use a kind of Hindu shorthand referring to the Upanishads when the question, who am I, is answered by tattvam asi, which in Sanskrit means you are it, or thou art that. You are not nama rupa, you are not name and shape, you are not the body ego. You have a larger identity, which was the creative principle in the universe, with the creative energy of the universe, the Hindu term being Atman Brahman for that. Now, this is not a philosophical speculation. This is something that can be pragmatically tested. And in non-ordinary states, you can have the experiences of your boundaries melting and your consciousness expanding so that it encompasses much larger units, becoming other people, experiencing group consciousness, experiencing identification with various animal species, identification with archetypal beings, visits to archetypal domains, and so on. And there's also a very significant experience in which you can have a sense of becoming the divine, becoming the creative principle itself, the experience of Brahman, the Tao, the Great Spirit, the cosmic Christ, whatever the name is in different spiritual traditions. So this is the term, holotropic, means that these states somehow can take us step by step, sometimes smaller steps, sometimes bigger steps, to the reclaiming of our sort of cosmic identity, of our larger identity. And as you know, wholeness is also related to healing. There is a healing that seems to be happening in this process of melting of the boundaries, if the states are properly integrated. So what's the difference between these holotropic states and the other non-ordinary states, or the altered states? First of all, if you have a trivial delirium, if you have a psychotic, organic psychotic state, there's usually disorientation in terms of person, place, time. People might not know who they are, where they are, what's happening, what year it is. There is impairment of the intellect, there is amnesia after those states, and so on. None of it happens in this holotropic variety. Here the change of consciousness is very profound, but also very, very subtle. We still remain sort of connected with this reality. We can operate, we know where there are bathrooms, or that there are bathrooms, and we know where we are, we know who we are. With the exception of spiritual emergency, we know why we are in that state. We're just in a shamanic ritual, or we've just taken some psychedelic, or we are doing a holotropic workshop. So we know we are still in touch with the everyday reality, but at the same time, another reality or realities are invading our field of consciousness. So we would have each foot in a different reality. Eugene Bleuler, when he was describing psychosis, he referred to it as double bookkeeping, doppelte Buchführung in German, to be in two realities at the same time. Another characteristic of the holotropic state would be powerful emotions that cover a much wider range than what we experience in everyday life, where the extremes are the extremes that have been described in spiritual religious literature. For example, on one side you can have ecstatic rapture, you can have a state of bliss, of peace that passes all understanding, celestial, paradisian kind of states. On the other side, there could be hellish state, there could be abysmal despair, there could be tremendous anxiety, there could be profound feelings of guilt, and then anything in between. The intellect is changed in a very interesting way. It's not impaired in holotropic states, unlike in the trivial deliria. The intellect functions in a fundamentally different way. So there are certain situations for which the holotropic changes in intellectual functioning are not great. I wouldn't like to be in a holotropic state when I have to do my taxes, for example. Or it's not good for driving the car. If you are a pilot landing a 747, you want to be in a different kind of state of consciousness. I call that state holotropic. Hele means matter, trapein again, moving towards. So it's matter-oriented consciousness, which is the everyday consciousness in which we experience ourselves as Newtonian objects, living in a Newtonian world, where space is three-dimensional, time is linear, everything is connected with chains of cause and effect, and so on.